Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see a wonderful big group at DM Contemporary. Everybody here to hear the artist talks for Elizabeth Duffy and Cheryl Yun. And I just wanted to say the RSVPs kept coming yesterday, and you will notice that there will be people walking in as the talks are proceeding. So we didn't want to turn anyone away, because the whole idea of the artist talk is to include as many people as possible and to have them participate in this conversation, the art conversation that we have here at the gallery. The artist talks have always been a very important component, a really valuable component of the program at DM Contemporary. Because this is the time, it's the educational aspect of what a gallery does, even though a lot of commercial galleries might stress the bottom line. This gallery specifically likes to go in between. We're not a non-for-profit, we are a commercial gallery, but we also like to stress the education, in a sense, the communication. And the education is not really just what you're going to hear from the artist, but it's also what you bring into this conversation. Your questions, your observations are going to be very important for all of us. The person who curates the show and the people, for the artists too, because now they can see the work that they saw through your eyes. So thank you very much, and please be sure to participate. I don't know how Elizabeth is going to conduct this.
No, it was just very informally, as I think Cheryl and I were thinking we could each talk a little maybe and then have a conversation together. And I think Cheryl thought maybe bringing some of her objects out might be better since it's such a large group.
We can help you with that.
Yeah.
We can do both ways. We can try to go in at some point.
Maybe, and then everybody should just wander around and be free. So I'm happy to start, Cheryl.
Please do.
Yeah. So
Elizabeth is going to
I'm
start.
Elizabeth, and thank you everyone, and so many familiar faces and faces I haven't seen in too long. It's great to see everybody. I'm thrilled, and I'm thrilled and so grateful to Doris for giving me this opportunity, because when I saw this gallery a few years ago and I saw that it had this wonderful kitchen space and still had a remnant of a home space, I thought, well, wouldn't I love to do a piece there? So I actually wrote a proposal that included Cheryl, whose work I adore, and met with Doris, and Doris went for it and said, why don't you do these two big rooms? And I thought, I was kind of terrified because I didn't have a whole lot of time to put it together. But fortunately, I had been working with this material for almost 10 years, so I had a kind of archive of work that I had been building. And then once I knew it would be in this wonderful space, I thought about pieces that I would want to bring in. So the first thing you should know is the gallery was empty before I came into this space, and so all the furnishings and the wallpaper and objects and everything were added. And I've been using as a source material for a long time now these wonderful patterns, which, if you're not familiar with them, are on the interiors of envelopes that you receive in the mail. So I brought one in because not everyone knows what they come from, since we're getting all digital mail now. But there's a myriad patterns of every kind, and I've just been collecting them for many, many years and using them. I find them really fascinating and beautiful because whoever designed them knew that they probably, there would be something hidden. That to me is very poignant. And they're also incredibly beautiful. So over the years, I started making drawings into them and collecting them and cutting them up and making them into different forms. And I did a few different installations in different forms with the actual envelopes, drawing into the envelopes. And then I started making drawings, crumpling up the envelopes, scanning the envelopes. And so it's sort of started to become this very sort of expansive investigation of these forms. And then recently, well actually now 7 years ago, I started working at Roger Williams, my dear friend Tayo, another wonderful artist in the audience, and there we have access to all these great, I work in an architecture school, so there's really great technology. So some of what you don't see, because everybody's sitting on it, is some of the, no, is that once everyone gets up and moves around, check out the seats of the cushions, because those are altered to make them look as if the leather is aging. And many of the objects have been altered in different ways. So, for example, this very well-known Castiglione lamp has a circle here, which I was able to find in Rhode Island, a wonderful place where I just drew the shape I wanted and they made it into an envelope form and drilled through it. A lot of the furnishings were just either silk screened, laser etched, printed. Fortunately, my husband, whose opinion I ask everything on, he's sort of my first, no, don't do that, or do that. He has a big 9880 printer, so I was able to print all the wallpaper myself, which saved a lot of money. So it's basically like a big sticker. So you can just peel it right off the wall, back onto the roll, and reuse it. So what's cool about that is some of the objects, like the little rug you'll see in the next room, I just took it off the wall and I can then sew it. It's actually a fabric that has a backing. Don't forget to use the bathroom before you leave, because there's some pieces in, a small couple of pieces in there. And if you have any questions, I think that's kind of an overview. This room obviously as more living space, and then the room next door I made as a kind of sitting and bedroom area. So there's everything from quilts and sitting, kind of, some things you have to kind of search for the pattern, other things it's more obvious. So, welcome. So that's my sort of brief intro. Cheryl, do you want to talk a little about your work, and then we can.
I'm just wondering if I should grab a couple pieces so I'm not
Yeah,
so strapped.
maybe
You could hang them from the lid.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll start with
that
Cheryl.
works. Yeah.
I also know she's expecting some visitors,
Oh,
so we're going to
perfect.
delay her a little bit.
Okay.
Is that correct, Cheryl?
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
start one.
So let's continue a little bit.
Okay, sure. Question, Lori. Yeah, I love questions.
I'm curious how much, well, there's one observation is, have you noticed that there's 3 or 4 people that are sitting here that could be part of your installation?
I noticed
And so how much,
Blue and white.
and so with that, how much just, I mean, you deal with chance and you deal
Very
with surprise.
much,
So
yes.
Could you talk about that a little?
Yeah, one of my big heroes is Marcel Duchamp, and if you haven't opened the cabinet and read La Vie Illustrée de Marcel Duchamp, it's hilarious. It's this little, I think it's like for teenagers, and it shows his journey through life and the broken glass. So a lot of the objects are found, and I love that idea that, sort of melding of art and life, that's very much about that. And so, so for example, the peaches, which are actually fake, if the light casts on them in a certain direction, the pattern appears on them. So little discoveries like that I make. Or my wonderful student who I had at Roger Williams, who helped me a great deal with this project, Joe Carpiel. He got really into it, and he says, let's try soap. Let's try, he started putting different materials in the etching machine, and so he etched the soap in the bathroom. At one point, I thought I was going to try to do vinyl on the windows. That ended up being, I think I sort of took on more than I needed to, but it's true, like I'm sort of picking up from a lot of different places, and many of them are just kind of, as the envelopes are, these moments that we're not in the studio, we're just out and about and we see something and it's an epiphany and say, okay, yeah. And I think the cabinet in a way exemplifies that the best, because in there are objects that some are altered, some are found, and it's just that blurring between, okay, did it get transformed or was it like that? And so that's interesting for me, for sure.
Yeah, nice.
How's your dressing aid?
Oh, this is my peasant dress in silk in utility bill. And then actually the top I didn't make. It's my friend Katie, who has a great store, a little plug for her down on East 7th Street, East 6th Street. Go check it out and get her card because she's got great stuff. So this is a Kenzo top that I put with it because I liked the kind of, I was kind of interested in the gender, like who lived in this apartment and is it male, is it female? So I want it to be both, so I sort of, the outfit kind of plays off that a little bit, I guess. Yeah, but I make the clothing. For each installation, I always make an article of clothing.
Did you print that?
Yes. Yes.
I like the idea of the security in the security envelope and home and domesticity as being a kind of place of safety.
Yes,
And
very
so,
much.
you know, I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about that and the whole idea of camouflage, you know,
Yeah.
like how that sort of wraps into
Very
your
much,
work.
and it's exactly what I'm interested in, actually. So it's to do. I think it's really a complicated thing, but I guess for me, like growing up, we moved all the time. My dad was in the military, and so we lived a lot out of boxes, and we moved all the time. And so I remember just setting up my space was always a really important part of whatever new place we would be in for that year or 2 years. And a lot of times I would go out, take my furniture out to the driveway, spray paint it pink or lime green or whatever my favorite color was that week, bring it back in and like arrange all my, so it's very much like I sort of feel like I'm doing the same thing I did when I was a kid. And like that idea that we all set up our lives around these things to create this kind of environment that make us feel this, but ultimately it is really very transient. And so for me, I really like that dichotomy. And this, for me in the work, that's important to be there. That it is about this idea of permanence, but really it's very ephemeral. So as these envelopes are, so I like that metaphor of the two playing off each other. And of course, like if you think of, you know, I've done a couple of pieces in spaces that are 19th century spaces, which for, you know, was a period of great material wealth. So for me, it's kind of really interesting to now take a space that epitomizes the kind of grand wealth in New York City right now, and is these beautiful glass spaces that, you know, they're really very much about this very beautiful kind of space that people set up for themselves. So I think it's, you know, taking a space like this is another new direction for me, which was exciting. Yeah.
May I add a layer and maybe
Yes.
you can elaborate on
Yes.
that, which is the privacy and security as opposed to the public.
Yes.
This being a gallery that
Right.
is public in a building that is a residential building, which is private.
Yes.
The security envelope trying to keep,
Yes.
you know, people who want to look in and
Right.
see being, you know, it's more private, but you opened it up to make it more public and
Right.
a little
So
bit more
very
about
much important. Yes.
what's happening around us. Our privacy is completely not private anymore.
Right.
Our
And
emails.
absolutely.
So
That's,
if you would just a little bit.
yeah, and I think if you, like, Doris wrote a really beautiful press release about the show that talks about that a little, and then Kagan Sparks wrote essays for both Cheryl and my catalogs, which she's really brilliant, and she really touched on that idea. And just, you know, this sort of, and I was talking to some friends here in this room a moment ago about being in this space, working here into the night, and, you know, seeing the people working out across there, and I'm putting up wallpaper over here, and this kind of like way in which this all glass kind of is open, and yet you sort of feel a little bit, and, you know, is someone watching? This kind of sense of surveillance, this kind of sense of paranoia in a sense is there for sure. And the envelopes, you know, to me, like all of that is in there. So I'm really thrilled you brought that up. It's very much a part of it too. Yeah.
Beth?
Yes.
Well, I'm just reminded that, of course, these windows are like this,
Yes,
the window
very
in
much.
the envelope,
Yes.
letting us in to see the pattern.
Right.
What investigation have you done actually on the variety of patterns? When did these kind of security envelopes start? Do you know anything about the history of the creators of them?
Yes, I do. So they start around the early part of the 20th century, Woodrow Wilson's time, and they started, there's actually a man in Providence, Rhode Island, funnily enough, who's made an archive of them, or he has been archiving them, and more come up all the time. So they started in the early 20th century, and originally they used to do, instead of a window, they would actually put some oil on the paper. But they had the pattern designs. They're not, there's very little information actually about the patterns themselves, except for the corporate patterns, which are very obvious, because it will say what the bank is. But as far as the sort of patterns that sort of patterns like this, this one is actually the same pattern on the rug, those are anonymous, almost all of them. We really don't know. There were some envelope companies that had people that drew them out, and they're in the public domain now. But yeah, and then later on, I think it was maybe in the 30s when they added the cellophane window, because they figured that people could put oil over the whole envelope and start to see. So like the oil acted as a space of vision, but then people would dip it in oil and read the letter. Yeah, because that would make it transparent. Yeah. So they've been around for a while, and there's amazing variety of designs.
Roughly how many have you discovered?
Oh, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Oh, hundreds. I mean, I have boxes and boxes of, I try to collect, and I just recently saw, like, it's almost never that I see one I haven't seen. But I had this very strange thing happen recently. One of my close friends had a beautiful house from 1790 which burned to the ground, and the only thing left standing was the chimney. And she knew I was working with this material, and one day she said, I got to show you something, and I wish I had it with me. She showed me this envelope, and it had these like beautiful big waves of water. It was a strange pattern because the pattern was much larger scale than they usually are. And it was the envelope of the fire insurance company. And they found it after the house burned down. It was one of the few things that survived. So it was like this shroud of Turin or something. No, it's this bizarre thing that happened. So she wouldn't let me have it, which I thought was really kind of odd. But then when she told me the story, I thought, oh my God, I don't even want to but I scanned it, so I'm going to use it in an upcoming piece. But yeah, there's probably, I would guess, thousands of designs. I mean, if you consider all the corporate locos, because those are constantly, even now, being drawn again and reinvented. And, yeah. Yes, in fact, there's an amazing book. There's an architect named Jürgen Meyer, a German architect, who is also very interested. Believe it or not, there's lots of people that are very interested in these envelopes. And Jürgen Meyer, I discovered his work through a colleague that I work with at Roger Williams, and he put together this beautiful limited edition book where he collected, you can look at it in there, he collected and scanned many patterns. I mean, it's only a small fraction, but it's a gorgeous book, limited edition artist book in there. So I included it in the installation. He makes buildings that use the shapes of the envelopes in the floor plans in the buildings and the window openings. So he's a really, really interesting architect working now in Germany. Yeah. Yeah, Jackie.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about your thought process when you're putting together an installation like this? How you know when you're finished?
Yes. Well, I should have brought with me, I have a folder that is so thick of lists, because to conceptualize this in my head, in my apartment, which is not a small apartment in Providence, but which has furniture and all my stuff, and I had to kind of figure out how things would go. So a lot of what I do is set up little kind of stage sets, but much of it I do once I'm on site. So I had pretty much figured out this organization here and what was going to be here. And this room is a lot more complicated because of the way it's divided up. So I wasn't quite sure. So what I did was I showed up with a 13-foot truck full of, and Katie and poor Cheryl were like, she must be crazy. I mean, this was full of boxes as if I had just moved in. And I thought, I've got to show up with a lot more than I need so that I can then edit out. And I had about a week. So I had this pretty much figured out, but I brought a lot of stuff and we played around, and actually there was a great night. It was a Tuesday night, and Doris and Joseph and Jacob were amazing at helping me to make decisions about where things really, I mean, the general placement I had, but a lot of the fine-tuning was done here in the gallery. So yeah, it's very much organic process, yeah. So not, not at all. I had an idea, and I did a lot of drawings, and I think I scared Doris a lot. But I made a Tumblr account for notes, like of things that I was just ideas and sort of things, so I could have a kind of digital place to keep stuff, and she could kind of peek in there and sort of see what I was accumulating. So thank you for putting up with it.
You scared not just me, but the building manager. He promised to let us in. I said it's just for an art installation, and it's just the artwork. So the artists are coming on that Sunday because they come from very far away, and they only have that day to install. And he said, okay, if it's just artwork. Then Cheryl and Elizabeth arrive, and Elizabeth has that big truck. And what does it have? Furniture. There's no moving in this building or moving out on Sundays. He said, but it's furniture.
Yeah. That was challenging. Yeah. Oh yeah. We were very lucky in the end. They let us move in because, oh man, talk about stress. I have to say, like for the past, I would say 5 months, I've been sleeping very little to work on this exhibition. So I'm thrilled that it's up, and I'm really, it's just for me so exciting to see it, to answer your question, to be able to, like in my imagination, to be able to see it now in the gallery. So it's really, for me, very exciting. Yeah.
I've known Cheryl's work for a really long time, and I see a ton of overlap between yours and hers. And I happen to be moving into an apartment myself, and so I'm sort of fixated on where everything's going to go. And then you realize that in a few months it all kind of disappears anyway. You get used to your domestic space and you don't see the details anymore.
Yes.
But I see that constant overlapping in Cheryl's work and in yours of things that by your repetition of pattern, it makes it important. Someone's in the space recognizing this pattern must be important because it's repeated all the time.
Yes.
And then also it just sort of becomes part of your day-to-day.
Right.
Back to
Right. Very much. Yes, we had seen parallels. We were actually co-curated in a show a year ago in November by Kagan Sparks in Brooklyn. It so happened our work was placed adjacent to each other. And we got in touch, and by chance we had... After the show, and we had actually shown together, we found out 10 years earlier. And so this was the first time we really got to kind of expand a little, especially in my case. I really got to expand and show a lot of work here. And so it was really nice to work with Cheryl. And Cheryl is responsible for the beautiful catalogs. Wow, they're really beautiful. So take a look at those.
Hi. How do the patterns correspond to the same color as they are in the envelope, or do you make color choices?
Yes. Usually I'm pretty faithful to it. What I've found is that almost all of the envelopes are either gray or black. They're predominantly gray or black, and then there's a few that weirdly enough are green, which is unusual kind of.
Yeah.
And then even fewer that are red. And so tried to stay to that balance, and I use the red. A lot of times the reds are either delinquency notice or things like where like you're gonna be late. So I've used those in some objects, highlighting the fact that it is delinquency notice, because it's also about obviously about consumerism and like how we all just spending and how much we borrow and how this consumer culture works, and I'm a big participant in that, so, and making my work too, it goes that way. So yeah, I pretty much try to keep to the palette of it. I sometimes change them, but yeah. But you'll see too, like this pattern comes in all different colors. Like a lot of times the companies generate them, and they share them and all of that.
Yeah, my question is, this pattern here, for example,
Yes.
that's not literally from the inside of a...
Yes, it is.
It's exactly the way it was.
Absolutely. And this is one that I scanned and just increased the scale. So this is absolutely one. Sometimes I take them and I draw them and then print the drawing from the drawing. Sometimes I actually print from the envelope itself. This is one that's directly from the envelope.
And the
And this too.
It's right behind you, the material behind you. Is that...
Oh, this is from a drawing of an envelope that actually had this kind of leaf pattern.
So,
In fact, it's this same envelope. I drew it flat and then crumpled it and drew it crumpled. So it's that drawn.
so you scan it and then make it a repeatable pattern? Or something?
Yeah, exactly.
You use the
So
software to make the edges match?
It's just, so for the fabrics, there's a company in North Carolina, I think it is, it's called Spoonflower. It's this great company that you can just send them a digital file and they'll print it on any kind of fabric you want. So this is actually from a utility bill and I printed it on silk. And then this is cotton lawn and it's, so you can just do a little swatch or you can do yardage.
And then make it repeatable?
Yeah, well, I just did a repeat of it. So I copy the largest section of the drawing I can.
And you match the edges so that they all match?
Sometimes not. Like, I really like when, for example, you can see the kind of, because the printing is you'll see that in the envelopes, the printing, there's a lot of overlapping and places that are blank and places where ink is, heavier. And so there's a whole range of, things that happen in the printing process, but kind of crude, really. My husband's a photographer, and when I first started doing this, he's like, "Oh no, you need to print it at 360 DPI, and it has to be perfect." And I'm like, "No, this is actually really poorly printed. I want it to reflect that." So, I print it at 90 DPI, and it flies out of the printer, which is great. It doesn't use very much ink. Yeah. Otherwise, it'd be hot.
First of all, I love how you're using all of this great technology and industrial tools to make all the patterns manifested in all these other surfaces like furniture and the rugs and the wallpaper. But I also really love your handwork, the drawings and the embroidered pieces. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your how you feel, if you feel differently about the various sort of manifestations.
So yeah, it really has to do with the space I'm working in. So the drawings I started making when I think I had a summer off and I had a studio that was as big as the rug, and I needed to work really small, and I had been working with the envelopes, drawing into them, and I just started to I wanted to draw from life again, so I went back to drawing those, and I made a whole big series of them. And I sort of accumulated some of those. The embroideries, at this point I have to do them outside because that's the only light, or I have a magnifying glass actually that I can work under, but they're really, at this point in my life, my vision is not what it was, so I need a really bright sunlight or magnification to do it. So they tend to be I'll work on them in kind of more intimate spaces, and then in my head I have this larger if I have a space I could put this with that, but I rarely, in my studio, and Lori, we had a studio together at the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, so Lori knows too, is that I'll have maybe a section of wallpaper and I'll put things up to kind of get an idea, but it's only when I have an opportunity like this to really go into a space that I can then kind of strategize and branch out. And So these are really, in a sense, a lot more intimate pieces that I just make in kind of quiet time in my studio. And I've had, because of the way my life is right now, I live part of the time in Providence, part of the time in New Hampshire, and then I have a little studio here in Brooklyn because I was on sabbatical last year. So I've been kind of also itinerant as an artist in terms of my studio practice. So I try to keep things going that are easy to move around and easy to go back to. And then, again, if this wonderful opportunity comes up, I can then say, oh, maybe I'll take it and really explore it, expand it out and see what happens. So, yeah. But a lot of the work here goes back, I think some of the drawings are from 2004. A lot of them I went back into or, revisited too. So it represents a long period of work.
I'm thinking maybe we take a few seconds break
Okay.
for people to explore, because I know some people didn't get the chance to see everything and we got all plugged up over here. So it would be great if you take the opportunity to take a look at the rest of Elizabeth's show, because you've only seen this room. And while you're looking at all of that, please try to think of how many variations of techniques and materials Elizabeth has worked with as you go around.
This one I didn't finish, but there's another one in the bathroom that you
So
can see.
if you take a look, yes, and definitely make a visit to the bathroom, because there are no other items
Even
there.
if you don't have to, it's important.
While you're doing that, also please make sure to take a look at Cheryl's exhibition in the special, the project room. And Cheryl, how would you like us, now that we see the number of people, how would you like us to?
We're not going to fit in that room.
We're not gonna-
We can all stand stuff, I guess.
We'll help you bring some stuff. How about we have everybody take a look at the space as it is, the storefront.
If you haven't already.
If you haven't already, take a look, and then we'll come back and gather here. How about we take 3 minutes, 4 minutes? Not too long. Thank you. So Cheryl Yun is going to now start with her talk to answer the questions. She's going to give you a little introduction about her work, and then you'll also have the chance to ask her questions. And ask her good ones. Make them difficult.
So I'm interested in objects that embody conflict, objects that question what we're passionate about, what we desire. I'm also interested in using sort of this method of utilizing a stereotype to critique a stereotype. So I come from a photographic background, and while I was in grad school at SVA was in the photo department, very photographic school, I started to think that I was more interested in using imagery than actually producing my own. And I started out photographing my objects, and then fortunately, like, my grad teachers were very generous to me, saying these are actually objects. But I was looking around, and I felt that there's a conflict between this idea of reading a newspaper and looking at images of lives destroyed, and just consuming those images and reading our newspaper and enjoying your coffee. And I felt that there was a conflict within our culture, that we could consume these images, and that that there was nothing that we could do or think. So I also I started to kind of see these images, and I wanted to use them on an object that would again embody a conflict. And so I felt that a handbag, in the case of this is the earlier work that I've done, I felt that a handbag was sort of the perfect object to show this conflict because it epitomized fashion. It's an object that you want one every season. So so I began to sort of collect imagery and place them on objects, creating sort of this visual fabric through repetition and mirroring. In this case, I used the actual newsprint image. And so newsprint, being from a photographic background, you're always concerned with archivalness, etc. But newsprint in itself is a non-archival material. Although I always spray them and try to create the most archivable object from this non-archival archivable material, we know that with most artwork, it's always deteriorating. And I became interested in the fact that this material is deteriorating just as our identities are deteriorating. So I had the handbag, and I started to sort of collect at this time images of tragedy and catastrophe, and this was pre 9/11. And placed them on these images. So I created these objects that embody conflict, that these horrific events into these sort of superfluous and playful and fun objects. I utilize one of my interests is sort of utilizing the language of store display. And so one of my first installations, I had glass shelving, kind of very much like a high-end boutique, sort of a glass display case. So at post 9/11, I started to think, only because obviously the way that we consume images sort of changed at that time. So I started to expound my visual archive of newspaper clippings to include images of political conflict, both international and nationally, and locally. Like I was living in Astoria at the time, so I collected images of a fire that took place in Astoria, as well as sort of tragedies and catastrophes that took place overseas. So a lot of times, so I had this visual archive of material, and the next body of work that I did just came actually from that archive, almost completely, both the form and the image. So I started to do this lingerie based upon an image of a suicide vest that I had from 2001. It sort of plagued me. I kept on looking back at it. This is basically the torso of a male. At the same time, I believe this was in 2002, in the news there are a lot of images of female suicide bombers. Also, there was a number of movies that came out where the female heroine was displayed as someone who was sexy and powerful and dangerous. And so I just felt this conflict about the way that females were portrayed and about what was going on in the news, etc. In addition, there's always this ever-existing and always popular Victoria's Secret runway show, Victoria's Secret. I mean, it's still just as popular as back then. And so all these sort of influenced the form of the next body of work that I did. And it started out, I would say, like as suicide vests that looked like lingerie, and it became lingerie with elements of suicide vests, and it's gone beyond that now into more actual bathing suits and lingerie. So I began with this new body of work. I also moved away from the actual newsprint material, which I truly love, but it gave me a lot of freedom to be able to scan in. There was also it was a lot easier to get images off the internet too, and to find imagery. And so I was able to scan in and invert, and it sort of my patterning, it just opened up the patterning that I was able to do, the mirroring and the patterning. The inversion of the image, both color and black and white, just to me associated itself so much with photography and sort of the documentary image, the way that the image is read and understood, and the way that the image is manipulated in our media by photographers and by the media in general. So I really enjoyed that reference. The earlier lingerie that I did was more one-to-one, and so this image, for example, the flyaway baby doll with suicide hipsters, the image is inverted and then mirrored, but it's pretty much true to size. from there, and then also this one right here, the halter teddy with suicide belt is also the larger image. But you can tell that if you look in the other room and then with some of these, I really started to mirror and flip and develop the textile aspect of the work a lot more. The lingerie is printed on agape tissue, which is extremely resilient but very sort of sheer and transparent. It's used in like repairing model airplanes. Like you can't mess with this material even if you leave it outside. It'll crumple up, but you can stretch it right back into shape. So it's really amazing. And I just run it through an inkjet printer. So the lingerie. So I sort of pushed the textile aspect of this to a lot of patterning, and I also pushed sort of the sexiness of it as the project sort of developed. And then more recently, so this is sort of later lingerie, this is probably earlier, and there was some that I did that looked even more like, it was all black and white and even more like the suicide vest. My more recent work what is a series of string bikinis, and I felt like the string bikini also was a very, very playful, sort of historically playful outfit. It also has references to sort of resort wear you can pay a lot for a bikini too. So I decided on this form. There isn't an element of the suicide vest in it, but there still does exist this conflict. I live in Connecticut, and Newtown is nearby, and so this series, and I have a daughter who's about 4, so this series is sort of based on a very local event that I felt like I really needed to confront and with my work. It's very, very sensitive, especially in Connecticut. So the pattern, the color is actually a drawing by my daughter, or a painting rather, and then the pattern is an outline of Adam Lanza's Bushmaster rifle, and it's repeated, and again, kind of treated more like a textile than sort of previously. I also did this bikini, which is a little different. It also deals with sort of gun control or use of munitions, and it's images of munitions from Afghanistan, and it's a little bit of a different style. But just another thing that I know, I'm always interested in displaying them as a store, and so I felt that, this looks like a home, and ironically, like I feel like that room looked sort of fit well with the windows as a store. I was able to put a mark on the window, which kind of adds to that store display and that branding. And then the other aspect, which was really fun to do, is a catalog. And so it was nice, to have the excellent essay written by Kagan, but also just the freedom to design the catalog. I appreciate that, and sort of do it the way that works with both of our work. So the other, I do have some things in the flat files there, and so I just wanted to pull out. This is my Botox purse, and I did it for a feminist show a number of years ago. But one side is before and after, or main stage. And the interesting thing is this was actually reproduced in the New York Times, which I got this image from the New York Times. So there's always this, like, whenever my stuff is printed, I love the one-to-one, and I think they pick it up. They don't seem to mind. But yeah, almost full size.